Number 20. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory from 1971. There is no life I know that compares to pure imagination. It's like you have to do it that way. I'm keeping it. You can't not sing that. Willy Wonka is a movie that I watched back when the remake was coming out. I had absolutely no interest in the remake, and I still don't. But I watched the original like when I was younger, and the remake was coming out, and I just found myself I was totally into it. Now when I watch it, it just takes me back to simpler times, being a kid, running around, having a good time. It's just so simple. I really do think it's one of the most imaginative films ever made. And another one I think most of us see as kids, which could be why we all look back at it with fondness. Gene Wilder absolutely steals the show. Without him, I don't think this movie would be as great as it is. Not to say the rest of the movie is bad, but he just elevates it to a whole nother level. He's just so unpredictable. One minute he's crazed and out of control, and then the next he's having just this really calm presence. It also has one of my favorite endings to a movie of all time. It will never not make me smile and just give me a nice warm feeling right in the heart. It's perfect. The film definitely has its faults. Some of the acting isn't the greatest, and it's drenched in the 70s. But the music, the imagination, and the charm make it a classic film that future generations will continue to fall in love with.
Number 19. Spider-Man 2 from 2004. When I think superhero movie, I think Spider-Man 2. I think it's quite simply one of the greatest superhero movies of all time. And what I mean by that is I think it's the one that just lives and breathes comic book more than any other one. But it's more than just, amazing action scenes and set pieces. It's ultimately a character study of Peter Parker, and that's really what makes it such a great film. It doesn't shy away from the fact that it's a superhero movie. It owns it. But it also managed to just be a great movie in its own right. And I think Peter Parker is the main reason for that. I genuinely think he's one of the most relatable characters ever put on screen. As a kid, I used to look up to Peter Parker / Spider-Man. But now when I watch it, I just relate to him. I'm just sitting there going like, yeah, that's me right now. And I think as I get older, I'll be like a 60-year-old man, like looking back on this movie and being like, yeah, I remember those days. So it's definitely, like I said, very relatable character. The film also just oozes style. It's got Sam Raimi written all over it, and it also just makes it stick out like it's a unique movie. So many of these MCU movies and DCEU movies, whatever the hell, they just feel like they're made on an assembly line. Like pump them out. Make sure you add some quips. Make sure you have it this and that. It just feels so just corporate and soulless. But this movie has a signature stamp on it. It is a Sam Raimi movie. And I think that this movie is really the best in the trilogy. The first movie, I think, is a little too comic booky and a little too goofy at times. Still love that movie, but I think it's too far in one direction. And then Spider-Man 3, well, it's Spider-Man 3, so really Spider-Man 2 is the one that will stand the test of time and will always be looked at fondly, and people will go back to it and say, like, yeah, that's one of the best superhero movies of all time. Number 18. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles from 1987.
I'll be honest, I actually have Family Guy to thank for me discovering this movie. They did that parody of John Candy's monologue, and it had me curious on what that came from. And one day I was just flipping through the channels, and there it was. It was on AMC, and it happened to be that scene. And I was like, oh shit, that's what that's from. And I decided to watch the rest of the movie from that point on. To this day, I still find myself in awe of how well this movie's written, directed, and edited, acted, everything. John Hughes is one of my favorite director/writers, and I think like in his prime, he could do no wrong.
He just had a way of writing such believable, realized characters. I love how the comedy of the movie is really just putting two guys who don't know each other in seemingly more crazy situations. But I also love how the movie's more than just a silly comedy. It's also a heartwarming movie about family, and these themes really just help elevate it from just a goofy 80s comedy movie to something a little bit more. Also, the ending never fails to leave me with a warm feeling. It's perfect for Thanksgiving. I actually try and watch it every year around Thanksgiving time, and I think it really just encapsulates what that holiday is all about. It really, going back to the theme of, this movie having to deal with family, it really does just cement that at the end.
Number 17. The Breakfast Club from 1985.
The Breakfast Club is another film that I just saw at the right time in my life. I believe I saw it probably freshman year of high school, maybe sophomore year of high school. And I remember at the time I was talking to my film teacher, like in high school, and I was talking to him about that movie and how much I loved it. And then he was like, yeah, he's like, it's a pretty good movie, but he's like, man, the kids are so whiny in that movie. And at the time, I was kind of like, what? What do you mean? And, kind of thing. And now, the older I get, I realize that he was totally right. And then the brilliance of the movie just hit me, and I was like, holy shit. It's so smart. And now, I realize that he was kind of right. These kids are really whiny, and they are really bipolar. And as an adult watching it now, you can relate to the adults that the kids are trashing throughout the entire movie. But at the same time, it helps you as an adult get back into that mindset of a teenager and what they're going through and what's going through their minds. I think the core concept of the movie is perspective and growing older. It's hard to put into words, but I really do think this is one of the smartest movies ever written, as your opinion on the characters change as you get older. But it also makes you remember the struggles that teenagers have and to make sure that their voices are heard. On top of all of that, though, the movie is also just extremely funny and very quotable. I mean, this is a movie I quote quite a bit. I really do think that it's one of the best scripts ever written. It's more than just an 80s teen comedy, and it's a lot deeper than its contemporaries.
Number 16. The Wizard of Oz from 1939.
The Wizard of Oz is really, quite simply, one of the most charming movies of all time. I think you could take the most cynical man on the planet and have him watch that movie, and he would smile from ear to ear. I hadn't rewatched it until recently, and I found myself just totally absorbed in the world of Oz. One of the reasons I got so absorbed in the world is that it just has this weird, almost surreal quality to it. All the backgrounds are matte paintings, so it just gives this dreamlike, surreal kind of weird quality to it. You can tell that they're on a set, and it really does add to the tone of the movie. The thing that resonates with me the most is its themes about family and cherishing the things that you have in your life. I think one of the reasons parents show this movie to kids at such a young age is that those are lessons that kids need to be taught, and those are things that you need to carry out throughout adulthood, and that's one of the reasons why you can enjoy this film at any age.
Number 15. Killer Clowns from Outer Space from 1988.
Killer Clowns is one of those movies that just scratches an itch for that so bad it's good type of movie. It's so self-aware without having to turn and wink at the camera that it just makes me laugh every time I watch it. The Kyoto brothers were fully aware of this stupid movie they were making, and it adds to the overall tone of the film. The first time I actually heard of this movie was in elementary school. I had a friend of mine at lunch tell me, like, yo, there's this really scary movie called Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and sounded freaky, and I thought it was going to be really freaky. And then, a few years later in middle school, I rediscovered the film, like on YouTube or whatever, And I decided to watch it thinking that it was still going to be a really terrifying movie. And then I saw the scene where the little clown punches the biker's head off. And I totally just understood what they were going for and realized that, okay, it's a stupid movie. And I just instantly had to watch it after that. What makes it funny is that the characters in the movie take it completely seriously. And I mean, to be fair, if you did put yourself in those characters' shoes, it would just be a whole lot of like, nope, fuck that, I'm out of here. You can't talk about this movie without talking about the special effects done by the Kyoto brothers. They're so delightfully cheesy, and it manages to hit that sweet spot of looking really good and silly at the same time. And that's not to say that the movie has no kind of creepy element to it, because it really does. The scene where the clown uses the police officer as like a puppet is definitely a scene that sticks out in my mind. That's actually genuinely creepy. I mean, it's overall just one of the most entertaining movies I've ever seen. I think it's a perfect example of a popcorn flick. I realized that that is a pun and it was not intended.
Number 14. Logan from 2017.
I'll be honest, when I first saw this movie, I didn't love it. I thought it was good, but it just didn't live up to the hype, in my opinion. But it just stuck to my brain like tar. I just couldn't help but really think about it. It was just a movie that that just kind of kept playing in my mind. And it wasn't until I watched it again on Blu-ray when it really clicked for me. And then I fell in love. It's not a movie that you really are going to watch over and over and over again because of just how depressing it is, but it's definitely a film that you won't forget. I love the Western influence on the film, from the cinematography to the plot that feels a lot like Unforgiven. Even though it is a comic book movie, it feels more like a film first and a comic book movie second, which is why I think it's one of the best of the genre. When I was talking about Spider-Man 2, I mentioned that I think the MCU movies kind of just feel like they're made on an assembly line. And this is another superhero movie that I think really stands on its own with its own style. It feels standalone, like you can just jump in and watch this movie. You don't have to have seen the other X-Men movies. It helps because you have an emotional connection to the character of, Logan of Wolverine, but it's not at all required, and it's still a good movie on its own.
Number 13. This is Spinal Tap from 1984.
Well, I think it's safe to say that this movie had a huge impact on me, as if anyone who's seen my short film that I put out is very similar to this. And to be honest, the first time I tried watching the movie, I just couldn't finish it. It just didn't really strike a chord with me. But I've also heard a lot of people say that, so I'm glad to know I'm not the only one.
Maybe it's because I'm now a huge fan of 80s metal, but now when I watch it, I think it's one of the funniest movies ever made, if not the funniest movie ever made. There are just so many goddamn scenes in this movie that just have me laughing out loud. I could sit here and list them all, lick my love pump and, how much more black can it get? The answer is none. None more black. It's seriously one of the most quotable movies of all time. Each time I watch it, I find a new joke that I missed the last time. There's a lot of really quick little sight gags and one-liner things that just kind of slide right through and they don't even mention. But the more times I watch it, the more I pick up on that. And I also love how they just get in these worse and worse situations and it's played totally straight. In fact, I've heard that some people even thought that it was a real documentary. It's even a little heartwarming too, with a nice little light at the end of the tunnel kind of ending. But seriously, if you love shows like The Office or Parks and Rec, you owe it to yourself to watch this movie, because without this film, those shows wouldn't exist.
Number 12. Big Trouble in Little China from 1986.
The first time I'd ever seen anything about this film was actually on like a YouTube video way back in the day about like top 10 funniest movie deaths or something, and it had that infamous scene where one of the main villains expands his whole body and he's like, ah, and then he blows up in like a pile of green goop. And then after that, I was like, well, shit, I've got to see this movie. So I eventually ended up watching it, and that wasn't even the start of the absurdity in this movie. I absolutely love how batshit insane this movie is, and it's all anchored by Kurt fucking Russell. This movie is all style and no substance. It's hilarious, action-packed, and has some really fun special effects. There's nothing to dissect. There's no deep meaning here. There's no symbolism. There's nothing like that. It's just an endlessly entertaining movie in the same vein of Army of Darkness. Seriously, if you haven't watched it, check it out. And if you can remake this movie, I swear to God.
Number 11. Halloween from 1978.
Well, the first time I saw this movie, I ran out of the room before the POV section of the movie was even done. It seriously terrified me back then, and honestly, to this day, still kinda does. I rewatch this movie every Halloween, as you do, and even with the most recent viewing with a group of friends, it still managed to freak us out. It's just something about that suburban setting that's just terrifying. It just has a certain amount of realism to it. Hell, Michael Myers could be standing behind you right now. Okay, he's not there. Some of the writing in the movie is hilariously bad. I know people have pointed that out before, but I personally think it adds to the charm of the film. And there are other moments in the script that are absolutely incredible, like Loomis's speech about pure evil. Just bone-chilling. John Carpenter is my favorite director of all time, and this movie right here is why. The third act especially just shows how good he can be. The tension that it builds is just unbearable. The score also adds a lot to the film. I don't think it would be nearly as good as it is without it. This is just a movie that manages to inspire me. In fact, I'm working on my own horror movie, and I will always find value in this film.